The beautifully serene and usually peaceful Green Mountain state of Vermont is under siege by dangerous groups from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and beyond. These crews are taking advantage of Vermont's lax criminal justice system and pouring extremely harmful substances into the state's communities. Violent struggles have ensued over the proceeds of this black market economy, and the result is Vermont's biggest public health crisis to date. What's up, everyone? Welcome back. So, the beautiful and sparsely populated northern section of New England is under attack by street crews from the southern areas of the region, primarily Massachusetts and Connecticut. While this situation is transpiring in all three of the northern New England states, including New Hampshire and Maine, in today's video we're going to focus on Vermont exclusively. Vermont is the least most densely populated state in the lower 48 states and is widely known for its beautiful green rolling mountains, countless dairy farms with cows grazing in the fields, amazing lakes and rivers, and excellent skiing in the winter. Unfortunately, because of Vermont's demand for substances mixed with its lax criminal justice system, it's become a haven for out-of-state dealers. Let's discuss some of the main hotspots in Vermont's emerging narco trade, plus some of the key factors contributing to this disaster in the north. Now, let's take a look at how this whole situation came about. While Vermont is a very safe, beautifully picturesque destination for tourists, leaf peepers, skiers, and other outdoor enthusiasts, the quaint villages, farm stands, and little towns also hide a dark secret. In the past decade or so, dangerous street crews and other various criminals have decided to take advantage of the untouched markets in the Green Mountain State. Now, this isn't a new problem necessarily. Secretly, Vermont residents have been struggling with substances for some time now. Adventurous dealers from some southern states would go up to Vermont and sell their goods at remarkably higher prices than they went for in cities in Massachusetts, Connecticut, or New York. Many times the dealers would find a local user in some small community, take over their residence, and sell to other users that were brought to them. Often this would take place in remote parts of Vermont where many times they don't even have local police. Sometimes state police might roll through once a day or a few times a week, especially close to the border or the more remote the village is. Unfortunately, though, in the past decade, the situation has gotten dramatically worse in Vermont. With the number of active users in the state reaching all-time highs, dangerous groups aim to capitalize on their misery. Even though the problem has existed to a much smaller extent in Vermont for decades, it seems that in the years directly following the corona shutdown, things have escalated dramatically. The effects have been felt through the entire state from its biggest city of Burlington to its most remote village or farm. Almost one person has lost their life each day in Vermont in the past few years due to these dangerous illegal goods. Many vulnerable people who have substance issues, mental health problems, or residents on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum have fallen prey to pushers mostly from out of state. The rise in active use in the Green Mountain State is tearing apart the social fabric of the friendly but stoic Vermont. Residents despair at their beautiful homeland falling into such a state of chaos. As if the rise of the narco trade and the suffering of local users wasn't enough for Vermont, in the last few years there has been a dramatic rise in violent crimes. It's not anything like it is in most other US cities or states, but any violence is out of the ordinary for Vermont. While some residents have seen substance use in their communities before, the violence associated with the trade was something else entirely. When crews from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and beyond began to battle over turf with other groups, Vermonters watched in shock and horror. So why has this problem gotten so bad in recent years? There's various factors that have contributed to the general suffering throughout the state of Vermont. In certain concentrated areas, idyllic towns and cities have come under siege by dealers. Those communities now deal with a lot of the same problems much larger, more historically dangerous places do, such as homelessness, higher numbers of addicts visibly in town. Property crime is up, general nuisance crimes have skyrocketed, including trespassing and shoplifting, etc. Users panhandle at businesses and markets. That's something that you'd rarely see a decade or so before. And now the most disturbing statistic is that violent crime is up. It's still very safe according to US standards, but for lifelong Vermont residents, it's a shocking turn of events. Like I said before, to a smaller extent this problem has existed for decades, but as the trade began to grow and more users sprouted up in isolated Vermont towns, more hustlers, mostly from Massachusetts and Connecticut, sometimes New York, would take the trip up to these communities to set up a beachhead. The risk was high, but so was the reward. What was being sold in Massachusetts or Connecticut could go for extremely inflated prices in Vermont due to the lack of product and the distance traveled from the source cities. It was a formula of supply and demand. The only thing was that the dealers stuck out like sore thumbs in these tiny towns and cities. The users would spread the word fast, and within weeks everyone would know you and your business. So, in my personal opinion, I think some of the key factors for this drastic turn of events in Vermont has a lot to do with societal problems that already existed but were exacerbated during the corona shutdown. Key programs are closed for people with mental health problems and substance issues. In person 12-step meetings all over the region went on Zoom instead of meeting in person. And when you're living in such an isolated area, it's tough not to have contact with people in your support network. Many people in recovery relapse as a result. All the while, the government was giving people money to stay at home, many of whom weren't even employed at the time and still got money, and the system was widely abused. At the same time, the court system was at a standstill. They were trying to figure out how to operate in the face of this quote unquote health crisis. This resulted in many cases being dismissed or people let out on personal recognizance that shouldn't have been, and many of them went on to immediately reoffend. This gave the signal to enterprising hustlers from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and beyond to make way for Vermont. Everybody was getting their weekly relief check, and there was a lot of money to be made. The cops really weren't bothering anybody, and if they did, the courts would release you right back on the streets with little to no consequence. Why wouldn't a dealer come to Vermont? The streets were saturated in their own home cities, and there was so much competition. Head north to Brattleboro, Bennington, and beyond. The possibilities were endless. Let's discuss the different hotspots in Vermont and how they differ and or compare. Now, it's safe to say that the problem persists in every single corner of Vermont at this point, unfortunately, but there are certain areas that have been hit harder by this scourge than others, especially when discussing the violence between the crews fighting over territory and proceeds. Bennington, Vermont, which sits directly in the southwest corner of the state, near the Massachusetts and New York border, is the sixth largest town or city in Vermont with a whopping 15,000 and change residents. Bennington also happens to be the first center of civilization you come upon when driving up Route 7, which is the main fairway up the western side of Vermont. People come from smaller towns and villages to go to stores and do errands in Bennington. Now, unfortunately, because of the high increase in narco trafficking in and around Bennington, many of the wider area's addicts have flocked to the town center. The small town's resources aren't equipped for this many active users or homeless people, and so many people end up on the town's streets constantly hustling trying to cop. Many stay where they can, and a lot sleep outside. In 2022, the violence started to get out of control in the small town of Bennington. That year, a 17-year-old and affiliated member of a crew was kidnapped by other members of the group and then was eventually unalived and thrown out of a car on a mountain road. All the participants, including the victim, were from out of state. Then in August of 2022, a dealer from Springfield, Mass., who was affiliated with the city's incredibly feared Knox Street posse, unalived a man on an apartment at Pleasant Street, Bennington, for allegedly stealing from him. Apparently, the Springfield man who was responsible for the crime on Pleasant Street tried to take out rivals a few weeks before this as well on Main Street in Bennington. Rivals from the city of Springfield, Mass., who represented with the color red, had apparently stiffed the aggrieved man of a narcotics debt. In order to send a message to the crew, on a summer day he opened up on Main Street in Bennington, where his rivals were visibly located. Residents were shocked. While they did not like seeing the users and homeless all around town, this violence was unacceptable. This kind of stuff wasn't just transpiring in Bennington around this time, it was happening in multiple places as well. Another high profile area affected by this public health crisis is Brattleboro, Vermont, which is on the complete opposite side of the state in the southeastern corner. It's just a little bit smaller than Bennington, and on most censuses it comes at number 7 at a little over 12,000 residents. That's the 7th largest town or city in the state. Wrap your mind around that. Some censuses have it as low as 7,500 residents, which is the size of Rockport, Massachusetts, but that would still make Brattleboro number 9. It's crazy how small Vermont is. Brattleboro is a commercial center as well, just like Bennington. Many smaller towns and villages depend on Brattleboro for groceries, prescriptions, and other types of errands. Another big draw in Brattleboro is it's the closest hospital for communities for miles and miles. But the real cause of Brattleboro's criminal problems is its position on I-91, which has become one of the most high-intensity trafficking corridors in New England, maybe even the Northeast. So I hope you guys are enjoying the video. So just this week there's been a bunch of stuff happening since I've just been making this video. Chose the topic. You guys, by the way, thank you to all the people that participated and voted in the poll that I did about what you guys would like to see on the channel, and you guys voted for this video about Vermont, which is the video I wanted to make, so that was quite convenient. But while I was working on the video this week, two big things happened. One of them I mentioned was the guy who got caught in that big Fed bust in West Brattleboro, and he was moving a lot of product up and down I-91 between Brattleboro and White River Junction on the New Hampshire border, which is, I-91 is a huge traffic area. It's moving probably between the borders and stuff, and I think they're probably
we'll talk about that more in future videos, but I think they concentrate more in Vermont because the penalties are stricter in New Hampshire if you get caught. The criminal justice and law enforcement is much more lax in Vermont. But not only that big case where the guy got caught by the feds and the bus in Brattleboro, but also a woman from New Hampshire was taken by force by a man from Holyoke and another man from Connecticut, and they brought her to Springfield, Vermont, and held her. I forget for how many days, but I can't say too much of what happened, but it wasn't good. So that kind of stuff's like scary. I don't know if it had to do with like she owed money, if she was working with the authorities, or something happened. But these are both things that just happened in this past week since I've been making the video. So a lot of stuff happened, back in 2022, 2023. But I mean, a lot of stuff is still very current and it's actively happening as we speak.
I-91 has become one of the main narco corridors in the New England region. The southern part of I-91 has always had a lot of crime and various illicit trades, but in the past 10 years or so, the northern half of the corridor has become a high-intensity area as well. I-91 serves the entire Connecticut River Valley, more or less, from New Haven, Connecticut, all the way up to the Canadian border. Along its journey as it ventures up the center of Connecticut, it runs through Hartford, the state's capital and one of the most dangerous cities in New England. Hartford has long been a haven for dangerous criminal organizations and narco trafficking. Further up, just across the Massachusetts border, you run into two of the most dangerous and substance-ridden cities, certainly in western Massachusetts, but in actuality, the entire Commonwealth, Springfield and Holyoke. In 2024, Springfield recorded a couple less bodies than Boston, while only being barely 1/5 of its size population-wise. This is where the majority of Vermont's problems are originated. Crews from Hartford, Springfield, and Holyoke are capitalizing on Vermont's woes. These are incredibly violent groups that are heavily entrenched in the narcotics trade. Hartford, Holyoke, and Springfield have very dangerous neighborhoods, and the residents of Vermont were shocked at what they were bringing to their state. Just last week, there was a huge bust in West Brattleboro that involved the feds. Increasingly, local police are looking for help from the feds to attack the problem. The police can keep rearresting offenders, but if they just keep laying them out, what's to deter them from reoffending? Local authorities hope that the federal courts will take a different approach than the state's courts. This one case involved a man who claimed to be selling a key of Columbian a day plus Fetty up and down I-91 from Brattleboro to Whitewater Junction right along the New Hampshire border. I'll talk more about it in future videos, how these narco traffickers are carving up northern New England. I thought that was an extraordinary amount of product moving in that one specific area. A lot of people online are speculating about if that's an accurate amount or not. Just like in Bennington, many users from towns and villages outside of Brattleboro have flocked to the town center to be closer to the trade. Downtown Brattleboro, especially by the transportation center and Flat Street, have become a haven for addicts and homeless. A lot of the things you can witness in downtown Brattleboro, you might forget that you're in a town of around 10,000 and not a large city. North Brattleboro is another area that has some legal activity going on. There's a lot of motels that draw homeless users and also dealers trapping out of them. There's also a lot of businesses that people panhandle in front of and boost out of, leading to countless no trespassing orders, where people are permanently banned from properties. A Hartford group called GMS, or the Get Money Steppers, were involved in a big federal case in which a large part of the conspiracy took place in Brattleboro, Vermont. A female member of GMS was charged with trafficking large amounts of Colombian, both soft and hard, and also large amounts of Fetty. The feds also described how members of GMS were actively trading narcotics for weapons. This is a huge part of the narco trade in Vermont. Some of these weapons were used in deadly crimes back in Hartford. Brattleboro is one of the hardest hit areas in Vermont as far as narcotics and violence. Census say that Brattleboro lost over 1% of their population last year. Brattleboro's location as the first major center in Vermont you come along on I-91, I'm sure is a major factor for its problems. Further up I-91 you get to St. Johnsbury, which for several decades has had some shady stuff going on. It's actually a very nice place and is one of the few towns of substance up in that area, but there have been rumors that criminal groups have been there years before the corona shutdown. Another Hartford crew called Hoodstar G's, with two Z's, were responsible for causing a ruckus in St. Johnsbury. They were there involved in narco conspiracies and also violent crimes. They led authorities on a high-speed chase all the way up to Newport, which is the last center of civilization before the Canadian border on I-91. It's also the fastest growing town in Vermont. There's been a lot of legal activity going on the Vermont-Canadian border for years, but I think that activity has escalated recently. As Bennington and Brattleboro are relatively new to this action, especially criminal groups and violence, one Vermont city that isn't is Rutland. Rutland is the fourth largest city in Vermont and is the largest in southern Vermont, even though it's almost near the center of the state. I'm just saying. At only around 16,000 residents for Vermont standards, it's a big city, and it has historically some of these quote unquote city problems. Rutland has the highest crime rate in Vermont, which is still much lower than the national average. Unemployment is higher than most other places in the state, and it's lower on the socioeconomic ladder than most of Vermont. Rutland is very close to the beautiful ski resort Killington that attracts thousands of tourists yearly, but I believe little of that trickles into Rutland. Rutland is on Route 4, which cuts across the middle of Vermont in a horizontal line and runs all the way through I 91 and ends at White River Junction, which I guess is becoming another high intensity trafficking area, if you believe what you hear on the internet. Even though Rutland has the worst crime rate in the state, it doesn't have visible concentrations of addicts and homeless like Brattleboro. There's low income housing developments and trailer parks in Rutland where things happen, but overall criminal groups aren't as visible as they were in the 1990s when Los Solitos, an infamous crew from Hartford, set up shop in Rutland. The residents were in shock, but the response was swift and fierce from law enforcement, and they sent the Solitos packing back to Connecticut. Perhaps if Vermont as a whole had a unified team approach that resembled law enforcement's reaction to Los Solitos in the 1990s, then perhaps the state wouldn't look like it does right now. The police can arrest people all day long, but when the courts keep letting the same people out for the same offenses over and over, they begin to think there's zero consequences for their actions. Also, it seems like law enforcement and different organizations that service the homeless, mentally ill, and addicted populations don't seem to be coordinating or have a strategy. In actuality, it seems like there's a lot of animosity, especially from the harm reduction community towards law enforcement. There were big calls in many places in Vermont to defund the police a few years ago. You can see how stretched out the force is already in places like Brattleboro when they get multiple calls at once. If there were no cops, I think many residents wouldn't feel safe in certain neighborhoods. They're certainly a lot less safe than they feel now. They were calling to defund the police in Burlington, and as a result, officers were told to back off a bit. Since then, in Vermont's largest city, also its social, cultural, and economic hub, people deal and use in broad daylight in the common areas downtown. Homeless encampments are scattered all throughout the city. Dealers from cities in upstate New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and even as far away as Philly have come to set up shop in Burlington to cash in. How's that working out, telling the police to back off? Burlington is Vermont's largest city by far at around 44,000 people. That's only half the size of Lynn, which is Essex County's largest city. I think it's in the top 10 of Massachusetts' largest cities, but that's just to give you an idea of like the difference between populations in the states. Burlington proper itself is the largest concentration of people in the entire state, but it also has the biggest metro region in the state as well. South Burlington is the state's second largest city with around 22,000 residents, and the very close by Colchester is the state's third largest city with almost 18,000 residents. All three cities sprawl into one another, creating the largest continuous populated area in a sparsely populated state. This area, close to 100,000 people living against Lake Champlain, is prime territory for out of state criminal organizations. And just like in southern Vermont, plenty of users from all over the Lake Champlain region in upstate New York are attracted to Burlington for the availability of substances and a lack of police enforcement. Hopefully, we've seen the peak of this problem in the years directly following the shutdown. I personally hope it doesn't get worse in Vermont. It's such a beautiful and peaceful place. It's a shame to see parts of it turn into dumps. I know it's being a bit harsh, but seriously, like downtown Brattleboro and places in Burlington, like it's turning into dumps. State leaders need to get their acts together and get tough on out of state criminals who come to prey on vulnerable Vermonters and push poison into their communities. This isn't the time to be politically correct. It's time to fix the problem, clean up their communities, and protect the Vermont residents.